Welcome to the HR Spoonfuls podcast, brought to you by Andera HR, the home of Help Desk for HR.com and AI for HRHub.com, where you can find assistance from qualified human resources professionals and learn about all things related to the use of artificial intelligence solutions for your HR department. Now listen in as your AI-driven hosts, Alex and Ivy, discuss interesting and current human resources topics, one spoonful at a time.
Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're looking at a legal case that really gets to the heart of workplace harassment. Honestly, it's a pretty tough one.
Yeah, it really is. It's a great example of how hard these legal claims can be. We're going to be looking at John Doe versus Newcastle County, and this one went all the way to the Court of Appeals.
Oh, wow. So we're not just recapping what happened, are we? I kind of skimmed through the case, and it seemed like every point Doe brought up, the court had a counter-argument.
Yeah, well, that's because it's an appeal, right? So a lower court already made a ruling on this case, and now the appeals court is looking at the legal reasons behind that decision. They're focused on the why of the judge's ruling more than the what,
Gotcha. Okay, so let's set the scene for our listener then. John Doe, he's a former employee of Newcastle County. He's suing the Mo County and two of his coworkers, Herbert Coates and Garrett Kratzer. And he's alleging harassment, retaliation, and this thing called constructive discharge, which I'm hoping you can explain.
Of course, yeah. And just to be clear, we're actually looking at two separate legal actions here. Doe is suing the Acoma County under something called Title VII. This is a federal law, prevents workplace discrimination, and then he's also going after his coworkers using a different legal area. This time it's the Constitution. He's claiming they violated his right to equal protection and due process.
Whoa, hold on. Before we get too far into this, could you just break down what those constitutional rights mean? I think a lot of people hear those phrases but don't actually get the details.
Yeah, definitely. So the 14th Amendment, that's part of the U.S. Constitution, guarantees equal protection of the laws, meaning the government can't treat people differently based on certain protected characteristics like race or religion, for instance. And then there's the Due Process Clause. This one ensures the government can't just take away someone's life, liberty, or property without following fair legal processes. So in the context of a workplace, this could be the right to be free from any kind of discriminatory or arbitrary actions by a government employer.
Okay, that makes sense. I'll think back to Doe and what he's claiming. What exactly was this harassment about?
So Doe is alleging he was subjected to a hostile work environment because of the actions of both Coates and Kratzer. He says that Coates was using, homophobic slurs, and then Kratzer was harassing him because of his wife's Filipina heritage, and also Doe's perceived sexual orientation.
Wow. Okay, there's a lot there. And he's also claiming Annachuac County is responsible because they either knew or should have known about this behavior and did nothing about it.
That's right. He's arguing that the Cachuan didn't do anything to prevent the harassment, and then even retaliated against him after he complained. They transferred him, and get this, to work directly with Kratzer, which, as you can imagine, just made the situation even worse.
So, on top of everything else, he's saying he was basically forced out of his job because it just became too much to handle. That's where the constructive discharge comes in, right?
Exactly. Constructive discharge basically means that the work environment was so hostile that any reasonable person would feel like they had to quit. It's like saying that the employer basically created the conditions that forced the employee out.
Here's what really gets me, though. The court dismissed Doe's case. And it wasn't because they didn't believe what he was saying. It was for purely legal reasons. I mean, how can a situation this bad not hold up in court?
Yeah, I get it. It is a tough concept. But this is why it's so important to understand the burden of proof in these kinds of cases. You can't just experience harassment. You have to prove that the employer actually broke a specific law.
Let's break down some of the main points the court focused on then. I think it'll help our listener understand how complicated this can get. So, for example, Doe said the Acoma County should have known Kratzer was a problem because he had this history of issues, and he'd even admitted to past problems at work.
Right. Joe even gave specific examples. Like he said Kratzer told him about former coworkers, one who'd committed suicide and another who asked for a transfer, all because of Kratzer.
God, that's heavy. But even with all that, the court didn't hold the county responsible. Why?
The court basically said, even if all that was true, it wasn't enough to prove that the county should have known the specific kind of harassment Doe would experience, especially because of his wife's ethnicity and his perceived sexual orientation.
So what you're saying is just because someone has been difficult at work in the past doesn't mean the county is automatically at fault for any bad behavior from them in the future?
Exactly. The court's looking for a clear connection between what the county knew or should have known and the specific harassment that Doe experienced. It's a pretty high bar.
Okay, so that's one hurdle. What about Doe's argument that he couldn't report the harassment? I mean, if you're being targeted, you'd think you'd speak up, right?
Well, the court found that when the county did find out about the harassment through a police report, they took action right away, put Kratzer on leave, and launched an investigation.
So they responded once they were formally notified. But that makes you wonder about how easy it was to report these things in the first place.
Oh, absolutely. It's a great point. And it gets to the heart of what employers need to be doing to protect themselves.
Yeah.
So yeah, we were talking about how the county reacted once they knew about the harassment allegations against Kratzer.
Yeah, it makes you think, like, what does this case tell us about what an employer has to do to prevent and address harassment, especially for anyone listening who's in management?
Well, it really underscores how important those proactive measures are.
Yeah.
Like having a clear anti-harassment policy, yeah, that's key. But it's just not enough on its own. You got to train your employees, let them know what harassment actually looks like, give them multiple ways to report if something's happening, and make sure any allegations are investigated quickly and thoroughly.
So it's about building a culture where people feel safe speaking up
Yeah.
and knowing someone's actually going to do something?
Exactly. And the court in this case really seemed to focus on the fact that the Crouse County acted fast once they got that police report. It kind of shows that even if you couldn't prevent something from happening, if you show you're committed to dealing with harassment, that can make all the difference.
Let's go back to Doe's situation for a sec. He said that him being transferred to work with Kratzer, that was retaliation. But the court didn't agree.
Well, remember, to prove retaliation, you have to show a direct link between the protected activity, in this case complaining about the harassment, and the negative action from the employer, which here would be the transfer. And the court just didn't see a strong enough connection.
Why not? I mean, come on, it seems pretty fishy that he gets moved to work with the guy who was already causing problems.
Well, the court pointed to something else that happened around the same time as the complaint. There was this argument between Doe and Coates. And that kind of made it harder for Doe to prove that the transfer was only about retaliation.
So even if the transfer was partly because of the complaint, this other thing happening at the same time made things messy legally.
Right. And it highlights something really important for employees. Document everything. Seriously, if you're in a situation where you're experiencing or witnessing harassment, keep detailed records. Every single incident. Write it down.
So be your own best advocate, because you might need that proof later on.
Exactly. Clear documentation can help show a pattern of behavior, prove that you reported the issue, and create a timeline. And that can be super important if you end up taking legal action.
Okay, let's talk about the constructive discharge thing. The court said the workplace was tough, no doubt, but it didn't meet the legal standard for being so bad that a reasonable person would have to quit. What does that even mean? Like, how bad does it have to be?
Oh, it's a high bar. The courts have said that the work environment has to be so hostile, objectively hostile, that a reasonable person would feel like quitting was their only choice. Can't just be because you personally don't like it or it makes you feel bad. The conditions have to be unbearable for anyone.
So, if I'm getting this right, the court's saying that while Doe definitely had a bad time, it wasn't that extreme level of hostility that would legally count as constructive discharge.
Exactly. This case really shows how courts try to figure out where the line is between a workplace that's just difficult and one that's legally hostile.
I'm sensing a theme here. With each of Doe's claims, the court is basically saying, yeah, you've got a point, but you don't quite meet the legal requirements to win.
You're picking up on it. This case really shows how important it is to understand employment law and how the courts use it in real situations. It's not just about being right or wrong, it's about meeting these specific legal standards and proving it.
And this is also a good reminder that getting legal advice early can be a good idea. A lawyer who knows their stuff can help you figure out your situation, what you can do, and how to build a strong case if you decide to sue.
Absolutely. And don't forget, laws are always changing. Cases like this one, they help shape those changes by showing where the law needs to be clearer or stronger.
So we've talked about the legal stuff, the court's decision, all that. But this case brings up some bigger issues, doesn't it? Stuff that goes beyond just what happened in court.
You got it. There are definitely some ethical and social things to consider here, for sure.
Welcome back. So we've spent this whole episode talking about the John Doe versus Newcastle County case, and, well, I've got to say, it's really made me think.
Yeah, no kidding. It shows just how complicated these workplace harassment claims can be and, how tough it is to actually get justice.
Yeah, we talked about the law and all that, but I keep going back to, like, the human side of this. I mean, the court might have dismissed Doe's claims, but that doesn't mean what he went through didn't happen. You know what I mean?
You're right. The law and, like, what's morally right, they don't always match up. Just because someone's not legally responsible doesn't mean they acted ethically.
It makes me think about those two coworkers, Coates and Kratzer. The court said they weren't liable because they weren't supervisors, but they still created a toxic work environment, right? At least according to Doe.
Yeah, and it brings up the whole question of individual responsibility. Like, what are we each obligated to do as coworkers to make sure our workplace is respectful and inclusive?
It's easy to get caught up in the rules, the policies, all that. But if we're not actually trying to build a culture of respect, those policies don't really mean much.
It's like, imagine you see a coworker being harassed or treated unfairly. What would you do?
Mhm.
Would you say something? Or just keep quiet?
That's a tough one. I think a lot of people would hesitate to get involved. Maybe they're afraid of getting in trouble themselves or just don't want to cause a scene.
I get it, but that's exactly why it's so important to create an environment where people feel comfortable speaking up. If people know they can report something and that it'll be taken seriously, then maybe we can stop these situations from getting worse.
So it's not enough for companies to just have the right policies, right? We all have to step up and be responsible for what we do and say, and speak up if we see something wrong.
Absolutely. We all have to work together to make the workplace a place where everyone feels safe and respected.
This whole case, it started with this legal battle, but it really makes you think about bigger things, doesn't it? The Doe versus Newcastle County case is a good reminder that even when the law doesn't have all the answers, we still have to keep fighting for a world that's fair and just.
And that starts with each of us in our everyday lives. If we pay attention to our own biases, if we challenge discrimination when we see it, if we stand up for people who are being mistreated, we can actually make a difference.
We hope this deep dive has given you something to think about, and maybe even inspired you to be part of that change. Remember, you have a voice. You can make a difference. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, keep diving deep.
Thanks for listening to HR Spoonfuls. For more episodes like this one, drop by helpdeskforhr.com or aiforhrhub.com and subscribe to our newsletter to receive HR updates and notices when new podcast episodes are posted. We hope you enjoyed the conversation and will join us again soon.